Good afternoon. Welcome to this electric car discussion with myself, Paul Hudson. I'm the motoring editor of the Telegraph, and joining me today is Vicky Parrott, who's an Eevee specialist and also a Car of the Year juror. Firstly, apologies for a slight delay to the commencement of this. We're with you now, and if you want to ask your questions, please feel free to submit them in the form at the side of the page. Going back to you, Vicky, you're a Car of the Year juror.
Yes.
Before we get started with the questions, 6 of the 7 shortlisted cars for this year's Car of the Year award, which is announced next week, is they're all electric cars. Is this a sign of things to come?
I think it probably is, yeah. I mean, I know that all of the jurors we all love cars. We love combustion cars as well as EVs, but I think most of us are quite forward thinking, and I think it is a sign of the times to come. I think that we will see, speaking as something of a petrol head as well as somebody who loves and advocates EVs, I kind of hope that perhaps there might still be a chance of some of the really cool kind of petrol sports cars that are still out there and still to come that might kind of do well in Car of the Year. But for certain, EVs are the way forward, and we're seeing more really, really great EVs as well. I think that's the point. That's the good thing that Car of the Year shows, is that what the options that are out there now are just absolutely brilliant. And so the fact that we've got 6 electric cars of the 7 shortlisters, and even the 7th, which is the Peugeot 308, is plug-in hybrid, and they're going to bring out a pure electric one as well. So even that actually will be a pure electric by 2023.
So you think we've reached the tipping point of...
I think we have.
Yeah.
I think it's not the future. I think it's the now. So I think that kind of does show it really. But absolutely.
And lest anybody being any doubt, my colleague Andrew English is out in Italy at the moment, or was it Spain? I can't remember. But he's driving a new Ferrari, and that's a hybrid. So even Ferrari's toying with electric, not toying with it, it's a production car, and it's mandated. So you may like it, you may not, but that's the situation we find ourselves in, that battery electric has pretty much been mandated as the only source power source for new cars from 2030, which I'm sure will come around a lot sooner than we think. So still wait for a couple of questions to come in. The first one is, which home charger should I consider installing?
That's a good question, actually. Lots of people are sort of considering this. There's an increasing variety out there now, so I think you want to ask yourself whether you want to prioritise the cost of the charger itself, or whether you want to prioritise, for instance, if you're planning on getting solar panels and home energy storage, there are certain home chargers that can really help you sort of direct the energy how you want to in that regard. If you just literally want sort of a straightforward, reliable home charger, then there's a number of really good options out there that I would definitely PodPoint, BP ChargeMaster. They're pretty inexpensive and they're reliable and they do the job. But there are home chargers that look really cool, sort of really designer ones. And like I said, there are some that that are really compact that you can't see so much, and there are others that focus on solar panels and otherwise. So you've got to pick your priorities and do a bit of research and decide which one works best for you on that front.
I think the one we need to add to that question as well, the government grants for installation of home wall boxes, that ends, I believe.
Coming to an end, end of March.
End of March, yes.
So,
So by now is
if you can.
Yes.
I know. Yeah. I mean, I think you'll probably see quite a few of the companies trying to offer deals to sort of give you a bit of money off to kind of keep that up. But obviously, the thing is, demand for EVs is high enough now that people are going to be paying for it anyway. So unfortunately,
shop around.
It's the usual £350 grant,
advice.
and that ends at the end of March. So shop around and see what you can get.
Okay. Andrew asks, what can the government do to compel the charger suppliers to keep their machines on the public network?
Oh, I wish I knew the answer to that one, because if I knew, then I'd be telling them to do it, because the public charging infrastructure is getting better at a really rapid rate. I do 15,000 miles or more each year in EVs, and I find that more often than not I don't have a problem, but when I do have problems, it's really kind of drastic and it's an issue, and it seems to be, it's not good enough at the moment. The reliability of the machines, I think we need to see more of, people like GridServe who have kind of manned forecourts for EVs, and there are a few other notable companies that are beginning to do that too. And I think we need to see companies stepping up to the fact that chargers need to be maintained on a day-to-day basis, rather than just installed and then abandoned for months on end to inevitably kind of stop working. So if I knew the answer to how to make that happen, then I would definitely do it, because you're right, it's an issue at the moment.
Okay, and another issue, obviously, which is severely denting the take-up of EVs is the matter of range, how far they go on a full charge. We have another question saying, I occasionally drive from North Wales to Mid Cornwall, about 290 miles. It's a difficult journey at the best of times, but with an EV, he thinks it would be a nightmare. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think probably that would be one of the more tricky journeys because you're talking about quite a lot of rural roads there as well. But I would add that actually the infrastructure is getting better out in sort of the more rural areas rather than just on the main artery routes. And it depends on, if you haven't got destination charging, then I think you're going to just have to plan to make a really decent long stop or two en route. But yeah, you are going to certainly have to plan that journey. I'm not going to deny that. I think that does sound like one of the trickier ones, but I think it's possible. I don't think it would necessarily be a nightmare as long as you plan it. And I do think that we are going to see sort of, significant improvements in the infrastructure out in those kind of slightly more far-flung areas as well as on the main motorways in the next year or two. If you think about how the infrastructure has changed even in the last sort of 6 to 12 months, it's only going to accelerate further. So yeah, I agreed for now that would be a tricky one, but I don't think it's impossible at all, especially if you've got destination charging there. But yeah, and I think it's another one of perhaps wait and see and see what the infrastrucre's like in those areas in 6 to 12 months even. So,
I think it's part of the issue that it is slightly changing the way the way we drive, the way we use cars.
Yeah.
Thanks for bearing with us. We've had a few technical issues. One of the questions we've had in is about somebody's considering buying an Audi Q4 e-tron Sportback. What are your views on that car, especially with reference to sort of tax breaks for electric cars?
Yeah. Well, I think the Q4 is a good car. I think it's sort of reasonable value by the standards of premium EVs. And yeah, it's a pretty smart looking thing, so I can see why a lot of people are interested in it. I mean, it has to be said that all electric cars obviously do get really low sort of benefit in kind. So if that's what you're paying for your company car as, rather than salary sacrifice and leasing and this kind of thing, then there's a massive benefit to it in that respect. So yeah, I think the Q4 is a good shout. I do think there's an awful lot of other cars out there as well that are offering quite a similar thing. But yeah, certainly I think for the value and for the sort of image and the way it drives, the Q4 is a good shout.
Okay, thank you to Stephen for your comment. It looks like their presentation is about as reliable as the EV charging network. I mean, obviously that's a big concern. Going back to that, we were talking earlier, myself and Vicky, about the difference between having a wall box charger at home and being sort of at the mercy, if you like, of public charging. So what are your views on public charging? Is getting better, you think?
Like I said, I use public chargers all the time. I do almost every day. And more often than not, they work. But when they don't, it really is, it's a total pain. And I do completely sympathise that as soon as you're in that situation where the charger that you wanted to use or that you routinely use isn't working, you do kind of just want to, throw it all away and buy a V8 instead. So it is just, and that's the honest truth.
You can't say that.
But you do, well, there you go. But, but it's honestly, it's not as bad as I think it tends to get covered in the media, because you tend to hear about all the bad stuff. More often than not, I'm all right, but yeah, absolutely, the infrastructure is not maintained as well as it needs to be. Not by the companies that are installing the chargers, it's not backed well enough by the government, and it's definitely something that we need to really, seriously sort out in the next year and two. Like now, it needs to be sorted. So I'm with you on that reliability now. I actually think reliability is a bigger issue than numeracy of chargers at this point. So yeah, so it's all out there to be sorted.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that we hope is going to change, but again, it needs a sort of commitment from government, if you like, or all the source providers to come up with a joined-up solution to this, because we know a lot of people do like EVs. They don't suit everybody, but those people who are considering one might actually quite like it. But there's still the concerns persist about the problems of charging publicly. And
I would add that if you've got a home charger, and I realise that if you can't have a home charger, that's a completely different situation again. But if you can have a home charger, and you can afford an EV with a half decent range, then actually you probably won't even need public rapid chargers as often as you might imagine, by the standards of most people's mileage anyway. So, but yeah, I'm in agreement. We need to sort the reliability out for sure. So.
Here's a good question. What's the average waiting time for an EV? Presumably it depends on the manufacturer and
It does depend on the manufacturer.
Semiconductors supply at the moment.
Exactly. The semiconductor supply is the big issue, I think, for a lot of people. Ironically, a couple of years ago, just before coronavirus, it was battery supply, and now it's the microchips. But so it's a real frustration, I think, for the industry. I think the average wait time is a bit tricky, but certainly it's quite a long one. I think Tesla's done very well because its Model 3s have been quite accessible. So the wait times on those tend to be, fairly standard, a month to 2 months. Although I hear that those are jumping now as well. But I think, like for instance, Volkswagen has actually just slimmed down its range. It's only got one version of the ID3.
A lot of manufacturers have done that. So,
like literally in the last few days that's happened so that they can make them a bit more accessible. But even so, I think you're still looking at a wait of, 6 months and up, this kind of thing. So it's really tricky. And some of them I hear are sort of more like 12 to 18 months. It's a bit of a disaster.
It's worth mentioning the knock-on effect for used EVs, the same as the used internal combustion engine cars, because you can't get them new or many of them new, so the used prices are going through the roof.
Used prices up, so it is the perfect storm if you're trying to make and sell cars right now. But hopefully the semiconductor problem will be another thing that will get sorted in the next few months. But fingers crossed. Here's
a good question. I mean, this is part of the reason we're doing this is because obviously a lot of people do have concerns. So Andrew Leonard, reader writes, how would you convince a low mileage retired individual who enjoys cars to buy an EV?
Well, I think EVs are great to drive. For the first thing, I would say go and drive one. I mean, honestly, the torque delivery on them, the refinement in them, they're really good fun. A lot of them have quite a low centre of gravity because the batteries are often obviously in the floor pan of the car. I think you might be surprised. And there is, I think, real entertainment to driving an EV. Don't get me wrong, I love a sports car and I love a petrol engine and a diesel engine. But I do think that the way EVs drive is really good fun.
I think they're easy. You basically get in and
absolutely, like go
select drive and just go.
Go and have a go. The Peugeot E208 that I ran as a long termer for the Telegraph, great to drive, really fun. So go and have a go in something like that. I'm not talking about your Porsche Taycans. If you can afford it, great. But even your everyday, more affordable EVs are still good to drive. So the first thing, go and have a go and see what you think.
Another very good question. Somebody mentions, do the charging cables come as standard with the car? Or
yes, they do. So every pure EV that you can buy comes with a standard charging cable that will plug into your home charger. And when you plug into a public rapid charger, so your 50 kilowatt and up, your DC rapid charger, they all have the cables tethered to the station, so you don't need to provide a cable for that. What you might have to do is you might need to pay for a cable that plugs into your 3-pin domestic socket at home. So if you're planning on sort of trickle charging from those sort of sockets, then you might need to buy an additional cable because some manufacturers charge extra for those. But otherwise they all come as standard.
And pretty obviously, if you're buying used, the thing to check with the used EVs whether the cables are included, because obviously you could be facing a huge outlay if you have to buy the cables from new when they should be with the car.
Yeah, I would add that plug-in hybrids, some of the plug-in hybrids you have to pay extra for your standard Type 2 public charging cable, which drives me wild. But I would add there is an exception. So I think Porsche charges extra for a charging cable, which it drives me even more wild. So do send your letters of discontent to them on my behalf.
Yeah,
that would be
you're
great.
Paying what, 17 grand plus?
It's crazy.
And you have to pay extra for a cable, really?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, exactly. I bought an 80 grand Porsche. Now I have to pay for the cable anyway. Such is life. Yeah, exactly.
And Stephen Spencer says, do you think overnight home charging spells the end of the low price economy?
What for you? Well, for utilities, well, I think that's probably being driven by all sorts of different things at the moment. I don't think it's the growth of EVs that's strictly driven the rise in utilities costs right now. It's certainly having an impact on EVs. I think as EVs become even more mainstream than they already are, I can imagine utilities providers might start to withdraw the low tariff off peak. But yeah, I mean, I hope not, but I suspect that may be the case. I don't know.
Okay. Another one, will the second-hand value of current EVs plummet when battery range improves in the future?
I don't actually believe it will. I mean, inevitably a used car value will always drop. That's the nature of used cars. But I think the point is that I suspect that the range anxiety thing, a lot of this is to do with people getting used to the fact that actually they probably don't do the mileage that they perhaps want to have. That aspect of wanting to have a car that you can jump in at zero notice and do 700 miles in is something that we're all used to as a convenience factor of cars, quite rightly. That's kind of the freedom of them. But I think that we are going to have a bit of an attitude change towards that with EVs, and I think the reality is that we're doing this for environmental benefits, more than anything. And if we're going to do that, then it doesn't really make sense for us all to have 70, 100 kilowatt hour cars sat on the driveway that we only use for a long journey once or twice a year. Doesn't really make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So I think there is going to be a slight attitude change towards that, and I think even those low range cars like the Honda E and the Mini, they seem a bit kind of crass to us now if you're used to petrol and diesel cars. But I think actually there is a market for it, and I think that range might become less of a concern for people as we get used to electric cars and how they function.
I mean, here's another very sort of, common question. Do we have enough energy to charge the entire UK market if everybody's driving an electric car? I mean, assuming everybody drives an electric car, there'll be, 30 million EVs to charge?
According to the National Grid, we will. So energy demand in the UK peaked in 2002, and that means that because back then, obviously, we weren't so driven towards having energy-efficient light bulbs and energy-efficient homes and all of this kind of stuff, and since then, our national energy usage has dropped. And obviously our renewable usage also has gone up. So we were something like 59% renewable energy in the UK last year. So all of those factors means that, the National Grid, whenever I've spoken to them, they always seem absolutely confident that they can support the electric car, the growth of EVs. I mean, they say that even now, if everybody went to an EV right this second, they say there is enough electricity, and the maths does add up. And also I would add that as technology improves, we're going to see more vehicle-to-grid charging. So actually, if your vehicle's got a full battery, it'll send energy back into the grid. And
been some debate about that as well, whether people can spy on you and rob your battery.
Data protection. Well, I mean, there's data protection issues with everything, isn't there? From your laptop to your phone to, I've got a Bluetooth toothbrush, which I've never actually connected. I mean, I don't know. Anyway, the connectivity aspect of it, I think, could be a concern for some, but the technology, I think, is good in essence, and I think it could be a good help. And I'd add that if you own an EV, actually, you don't charge at home as often as you think. You don't necessarily plug in every night unless you're a very high mileage driver, which not many people are.
Yeah.
So it is a different thing. You might charge once a week rather than every night. So it is a case of getting used to it. Yeah.
Paul McGuinness points out that there's the local grid has absolutely no chance of supporting every house charging their cars. Well, I'm not sure the figures for that. A lot of it depends on whose data you look at. But
well, I think actually, if you, I've got some, if you talk to people who live out in really rural parts, there are aspects of kind of local, the electrical infrastructure being an issue. So I do think that's another thing that in the longer term we need to exactly.
I think it's worth having that as part of the debate. That it's all very well, whether you like electric cars or not, they are pretty well fit for purpose. If you can't charge the blooming things,
the cars are 100% fit for purpose now. Don't get me wrong. I'd like more energy dense batteries and lighter batteries tomorrow, but we need that. But nonetheless, I think that the trials with the infrastructure, the public charging infrastructure, and to a certain extent shoring up those more rural, the sort of substations and things, I think is all part of it, and making three-phase more accessible as well. So all of that, it's all to be worked on. Yeah, absolutely.
I need to go back to my O-level physics.
It is all part of it. But.
We ran a little poll earlier on, and the questions were: are you considering buying an electric car in the next year? And 40% of the answers were yes, I am considering buying an EV, which is a very interesting ratio, because a lot of the responses we get are actually quite sceptical about taking up, but I think that perception will change. 31% of respondents said I would consider buying an EV, but not this year, and then 29%, almost the same, say they do not plan on buying an EV. So we haven't put a time frame on that, but the important thing to point out is whether we like it or not, this has been mandated by government. So after the start of 2030, you will not be able to buy a brand new petrol or diesel powered car. Hybrids have got an extension till 2035 at the moment, but there again, on the other hand, rest assured that if you're absolutely dead set against electric cars, obviously there will still be a huge pool of used petrol and diesel cars. So if you're a fossil fuel addict, if you like, there's no need to be concerned. You won't be driven off the road. So have we got any more questions? We're still on the poll.
I was thinking about this with the sort of 2030 ban, because I've got an old 30-year-old Mercedes, and I get a lot of people who've got kind of old classics and stuff asking me about whether that's going to affect things from 2030 onwards and whether they're still going to be able to use them. But I remember talking to one of the MPs as well, and he was sort of lobbying for making sure that classic cars and petrol and diesel cars are allowed to stay on the road for as long as possible after the ban. So I do think that that's kind of... The government has never, ever sort of even hinted at the prospect of banning them altogether. Right, I do think that city centres are going to be a different kind of prospect, but yeah, it's an interesting one. It's but yeah,
obviously the knock-on effect of that is obviously with EVs being the majority of new car sales, petrol and diesel is going to be less plentiful, and I think we'll have to get used to that. So, and probably quite a bit more expensive, but that's not really the remit of this discussion.
Yeah.
Good question, actually, Jack Charrington. In terms of the end of life of an EV car, what are the CO2 implications of disposing of a battery?
Yeah, that is a good question. So batteries are more recyclable than most people realise. So they're about 96% recyclable. It's actually the resins in the battery that are tricky to recycle or aren't recyclable at the moment. Everything else is fairly recyclable. Well, I say is recyclable. The CO2 implications of that aren't really that much greater than the sort of standard lead batteries that you get, 12-volt batteries in cars now, not to mention all the other metals and everything in terms of that. So the CO2 burden of recycling an EV is not much greater, if at all, than that for recycling a standard car. Because if you think about all the other kind of aspects of a combustion engine as well that need recycling. But yeah, I do think that recycling facilities are really important, and I think actually recently we've heard news there might be a recycling factory in the UK, which would be really good, because it's transporting used batteries that can be one of the trickier aspects. So having it in the UK is really good. So, yeah.
I think there's one of the concerns as well is the cost of EVs. I mean, why are they so expensive? Is there a simple reason why?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's the batteries. It's the cost of the batteries.
And development, or is that sort of amortised by the manufacturers?
Yeah, I think that's certainly part of it, but it is more to do with the actual sheer, manufacturing cost of the batteries, which is quite widely reported as being the significant cost of an EV. Right. So at the moment, the battery is still why an EV tends to be more expensive than a conventional petrol or diesel. But I'd add that we're already starting to see cars being almost on parity. So EVs with, for instance, if you look at the Skoda Enyaq IV, it's not that much more expensive than the comparable Skoda Kodiaq. Or you've got the MGs, they've got a car with 260 miles that costs under £30,000 now. I was talking to Luca Di Maio, who's the boss of Renault, and he's saying that he thinks we'll see parity between the two, between ICE cars and EVs within a couple of years at most.
Okay, yeah.
But I do think that you will see, unfortunately, obviously petrol and diesel cars are going up as well at the same time, but you'll see the two meet quite soon.
Yeah, I suppose market forces dictate that the more we produce more batteries, the cost
also monthly
will come down.
And stuff. Yeah, absolutely. Monthly PCP deals and stuff are out there, so you can get a decent EV for £300 per month relatively easily these days if you're willing to go with a smaller car. So yeah. Absolutely.
Here's another fantastic question, actually. I mean, this is one of the questions I get asked most often. Is, how often will the battery need to be replaced on an electric car?
Never. It's really kind of an old wives' tale that you need to buy a new battery every 5 years or something. It's just not true. And to be fair, actually, modern lithium-ion batteries are proving to quite often outlive the car. So you can expect the battery to degrade, obviously. So it will degrade. You'll probably
as it does with your phone. I mean, it's the same battery chemistry,
the same technology. So if you have a maximum range from your battery when you get the car, then probably after sort of 10 years, 100,000 miles, you might see something like a 10 to 15% drop in that range, it seems typically. And we're getting more and more data on that front. Obviously, we've had Teslas, very high mileage Teslas around for a number of years now. There's a big company in America that runs thousands of cars as a fleet, and they've been tracking their battery usage. So that's some quite good data we've got now.
Okay.
So yeah, that seems to be the way it's going. Actually, the batteries, will last longer than the car ultimately, and can often go into second use as well after that. So it's not the horror stories that you hear, to be honest, really, on that front.
Yeah, I'm sorry. There's also the question of the used market will absorb that or not.
Yeah.
If there does tend to be a problem with EV batteries, people won't buy the cars and they'll be junk. But I think that there's too many people with invested interest in stimulating a used EV market for that to happen.
Yeah, and I would add, it's not, I mean, I don't think people realise, but you can actually repair sort of dud cells on batteries. It does need to be done by a specialist, of course it does. But I spoke to an independent garage that does battery replacements and battery refurbishments and this kind of thing. And they did a battery refurbishment on a taxi, a London taxi, a very rare case of having a battery fault, and they replaced a few cells, and actually it increased the range, and it cost less than £1,000. So this sort of stuff can be done. It's not out
I mean, just off the top of your head, sorry to put you on the spot, Vicky,
Not at all.
I mean, how much these days, right here and now, would it cost to replace the battery of an average EV, a Kia or Hyundai or?
I'll be honest, I don't really know.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is,
it's
it
£4,000
depends.
or £5,000 I've heard, but
Well, that's always the figure that gets bandied about, but I think that's been around for a long time.
Yes,
and the problem is the technology and the batteries have changed, and you're talking about bigger battery packs sometimes. And so I'm not willing to really say that that's accurate. I think that's just a figure that's been kind of like, Chinese whispered around the world.
Become a truism.
And
Yeah.
I think probably the point here is that actually there's so little data on it because so few batteries have ever needed to be replaced.
That's
so
a good point. Yeah.
I think this is why it's very hard to give an answer to that. So
yeah,
it's a tricky thing for sure.
We sort of touched on this, but Rakesh is asking, will the price of EVs come down in the future, do you think?
Yes, I think they will come down in the future. Yeah, I think it will inevitably. I think what is a shame is that because of the current technology with the batteries, it's very tricky for manufacturers to produce and what in the industry you call an A segment or sort of a smaller city car. So that kind of thing with an electric battery is very, very hard for manufacturers to make money on, and that's why we haven't really seen your sort of your £10,000 to £15,000 electric car, which I think is a real shame for consumers. So. Hopefully, with
I would probably buy one
changes,
for, I live and drive in the capital, a small, something like a Honda Eevee. It's a lovely little vehicle.
Yeah.
I don't need a whopping range, and as do many people.
Exactly.
So, but if they can make one that's affordable,
Yeah.
and costs are coming down. I mean, the Renault Zoe used to be like
exactly
30,000, didn't it? Best part of £30,000, and now I think you can get one for nearer 20. So
and there's all sorts of things changing with battery technology. Not to mention so you've got manufacturers like the new Aura Cat, which is quite an interesting one. So you've got Chinese manufacturers coming in with that kind of thing. So it'd be interesting to see where that goes. Hopefully there will be an electric solution in that sort of price range. I hope in the not too distant future.
Interesting. I mean, we were talking earlier about MGs. I mean, obviously they're Chinese made these days, but I mean their range of EVs they're a little bit cheap and cheerful. But that's the point. They are cheap. So if you want to get on the EV bandwagon, they're not bad cars. So could be worth a look. Sure, we'd all love a Porsche or a BMW, but as it is with internal combustion, that's simply not an option for most of us. So another question is, do you need to replace tyres more often due to the higher torque of a electric motor?
Not really, no, I don't believe so. You can get a bit of wheel spin off the line in EVs quite easily because they do have a lot of torque from zero. But typically, I don't think it's really going to be that much of a noticeable difference in tyre consumption from what I've experienced, or from all the people. No, basically no. I don't think so. No. I think you'll be fine.
I think a few people are concerned about the weight of the cars as well. Obviously,
the weight of the cars,
the weight of the batteries puts a bit more strain on the tyres. Whether that might have a knock-on effect with things like traffic furniture and potholes, which is a concern for all of us, no matter what we drive. So
I don't really think you are going to see a noticeable, extra degradation in tyres over a standard petrol or diesel car. I have to say, I just don't think you are. But.
Yeah. Okay. And going on to caravanning, the reader asks. There doesn't appear to be an EV that can tow a caravan. I mean, is that true? I mean, there have been a few issues with towing weights of EVs.
It's not true. There are EVs with quite high towing capacities, but unfortunately they tend to be the more expensive EVs, and also inevitably even those do suffer quite substantially with range when you're towing a caravan. Not only that, but going back to the infrastructure again, if you want to obviously rapid charge an EV that's towing a caravan, you might have real issues with accessing the charging points. So I think the towing aspect of EVs is definitely one that still needs to be addressed, really. But I would say that manufacturers are getting a lot better. These days you are seeing actually quite decent towing capacities, even on some of the more affordable EVs. Certainly if you're looking at towing like a light trailer, which some people obviously do to go to the tip and this kind of thing, actually there's quite a lot of EVs that will do sort of 800 kilos to 1,000 kilos. But caravanning, I think, we're still a way off really having
Yeah, so
a reasonable solution.
You need a 3 to 3.5 metric ton towing weight,
yeah,
really.
So 2.5 up, really. I think,
so
for a caravan. But
so I think
so you're looking at the really expensive EVs for that, and even then, you're probably going to have slightly limiting range when you're towing in the real world.
I think our advice for people who tow regularly is to stick with your diesel 4x4 for the time being, which is obviously you can still use for another best part of 8 years and beyond. What happens to the batteries in the event of a crash?
Well, I mean, the battery packs are designed to be so strong that they're very, very extremely hard to actually access the cells in the pack. So all of the EVs are crash tested to exactly the same standards that all petrol and diesel cars are. And obviously, actually quite often EVs come out with slightly higher safety scores than standard petrol or diesel cars, because actually the battery pack gives extra sort of structural rigidity to the car. It is heavy, of course, I'm not denying that. But yeah, the actual safety standards on them is extremely high. So I think, actually having the cells exposed to the air and having that kind of, the sort of infamous aspect of batteries, which is when they're exposed to the air, then obviously they burn for a very long time.
Yes, I mean, there's been issues with lithium fires which burn for a very long time, don't they? Exactly. But again, how likely is that? I mean, how often do everyday petrol and diesel cars catch fire?
Precisely that, and I mean, obviously it's not a pleasant thing to consider for anybody. No. But and I would add also that emergency services now are also being trained to deal with it and this kind of thing. And there's all sorts of solutions that are, because I mean the EVs are out there now and being used on the road, so they have got solutions for this. But yeah, it's a lot of people worry about it, but in reality, statistically, EVs are actually safer than petrol and diesel in terms of the likelihood of catching fire in an accident. So. Yeah,
I think it's a good question. What about long distance HGVs? Can they realistically move to electric battery power?
Well, Tesla would certainly tell you that they can, wouldn't they? But
they have that truck, don't they?
I think to an extent with sort of lighter commercial vehicles like pickups and things, I think it can be an option. I think with HGVs, I think possibly hydrogen is actually the better answer.
That's hydrogen fuel cells, which create their own electricity.
I just think that for HGVs and also for commercial vehicles, there's things like tractors, stuff that needs to be used constantly all day long, particular times of the year, and this kind of stuff. I think hydrogen might be a better solution. I do think that batteries may still be a part of it, the sort of battery electric technology, and I certainly think that battery electric is the way forward for passenger vehicles. Together with possibly some other stuff, I think synthetic fuels is quite an interesting technology.
Yes, it's interesting reading about
so
those,
I don't think that battery is necessarily the sole solution, but I do think it's a big part of it. And for HGVs, I think hydrogen might play a big part. So yeah.
If sales of internal combustion engine cars are going to stop in 2030, will there be a big depreciation on those internal combustion engine cars?
Well,
I mean, you need a crystal ball. I mean,
exactly. It is a bit
if you knew that, you'd be a very rich woman.
I don't think. Well, I think if anything, it depends a bit. But I suspect that there might actually be quite good demand for used ICE cars initially, at least. In the longer term, I think perhaps yes.
I think so. I mean, as I said earlier, I mean, given the caveat of probably fuel being more scarce and more expensive, yes, there's absolutely no reason to run modern petrol and diesel cars, much as we run classic cars from the 20s through to the 80s. There's no reason why we shouldn't be able to do that. How does that apply to hybrids as well? If hybrid car sales are going to stop in 2035, will there be less issue with lithium then as well?
What, with depreciation in hybrids?
I think so, yes, yeah.
I think
thrust of the question.
Yeah, so again, I mean, it's a bit of a crystal ball question, but I think I suspect that used hybrid values will probably be more stable for the longer term, because there will still be demand for them, I suspect, after the 2035 ban. But I suspect, again, in the longer term after that, I really do believe that EV technology is going to become it's going to be so much more common, and the infrastructure will be so much better that actually a lot of people, by then, I suspect that demand for hybrids, even as new buys, might be quite low. So I don't know. Potentially, as a bridging technology, it works, but maybe not so much in the future.
Philip asked, why isn't hydrogen the answer for cars then? I mean,
I
there
saw
obviously hydrogen fuel cell technologies exist.
Yes.
Toyota Mirai is an excellent car.
It is a really good car, yeah. Well, look, I mean, I like hydrogen fuel cell technology, and but looking at the tricky aspect of it is not only how you transport the hydrogen, but it's installing the infrastructure. It's having the technology in the cars ready to be used. I think even if we look at it as a long-term prospect, and hydrogen has been a long-term prospect for a long time now, actually it doesn't really make a lot of sense because battery electric vehicles already offer the solution. And I do think that whilst I've already said that I think hydrogen might play a part for HGVs, I do sort of feel that in reality passenger cars, a battery electric vehicle is ultimately more efficient than a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle in terms of the energy it uses to travel a mile. And I think that's a significant aspect of it. Not only that, and the fact that the technology is already so far progressed. There are also issues with hydrogen fuel pumps. You'd probably have to have solar technology.
Yeah, there are. I think there are
producing hydrogen on site if you want it to be actually really green.
I think there are now majestic 12 hydrogen pumps in the UK, which is obviously going to stymie growth. But it's a bit the same as the EV argument. Without the demand, people won't supply the infrastructure. But without the infrastructure, everyday users aren't going to be tempted to adopt this, whatever the propulsion is. So I think we'll look at that one. We are generally sort of fans of hydrogen fuel cells, but I think it seems from where I sit that and government has mandated that battery electric is the way to go. Like that or not, as I keep saying, that has been seen as the future. So with hydrogen fuel cell for possibly HGVs and also ships, which obviously the amount of diesel used on ships freighting all your Christmas presents from China, that's a huge source of pollution. So that's going beyond our remit here. But is there enough third-party support, or will EV cars have to go to main dealers for servicing?
Well, I think the independent garage network will change along with everything else. I think they're going to have to if they're going to survive. And I think there's already quite a lot of forward-thinking guys out there doing it. There's a really, actually quite a good culture already for garages going to EVs and offering that kind of sort of specialist support. Obviously, it does need retraining for some of the staff and this kind of thing. But I think it won't take too long actually for that industry to sort of step up and offer an alternative to main dealer servicing and this kind of thing. So ultimately I think you will be able to go to independent garages. There's already quite a few out there, but it will pick up.
Right,
definitely.
okay. Well, there's a very pithy question here. EV or hybrid? I mean, that's a very good question because, a lot of people, I get a lot of reader questions coming directly to me just saying, should I buy an electric car? And you think, well, obviously it depends on your use, but there are other options, being self-charging hybrid, or so-called self-charging hybrid and plug-in hybrid. So, it really depends on your use, but
it just depends on your use. I think that actually, I believe that EVs are already sort of leapfrogging the hybrid technology faster than probably people expected it to. I think that depending on your usage, I think more people would be better off going with an EV these days. But I'm not averse to hybrid technology. I think as a stepping stone, I think it is good. It really depends on what you're doing. If you do a lot of really short journeys, frankly, probably a pure electric car is going to do it just better. Yeah. And if you do really high mileage, then you might actually even be better off considering a really efficient diesel rather than a hybrid. So it's really tricky. But if you do, if you are really keen to get those electric benefits, obviously plug-in hybrids have pretty good benefit in kind tax, so they got company car perks as well. So I'm not averse to them. I think if it really suits your lifestyle, I think you just have to have a fairly niche lifestyle to justify that over either an EV or possibly a really efficient full hybrid or diesel or whatever. So
I think I suggest to a lot of people, well, if you're not sure about going battery electric, well, maybe try a hybrid. Look at that first as a halfway house, if you like, between internal combustion and full battery, and see how you get on. And a lot of hybrids of either type will do probably, certainly 35, but you'd get on for 50 miles an hour of electric-only range, claimed at least. I mean,
yeah, depending
like
on
most
how
of
much you're
these
willing to
things.
spend. Yeah, exactly.
Yes, yeah,
So I think a lot of them sort of more like sort of 25 to 30 miles realistically.
okay.
But you get your X5 plug-in hybrids and all that sort of stuff, and C classes now as well, and they do sort of 60 miles, so it's quite impressive.
Well, I mean, I think you might have seen more recent data, but I believe. I think that the average UK commute is 25 miles, isn't it? So
yeah, exactly.
you could probably, in theory at least, you could probably do your commute on electricity only in a plug-in hybrid.
You could, but then
Well,
again, if you
a
could do
lot
it,
of people could. Yeah.
Exactly. But then if you're doing that routinely, and then you're doing maybe sort of a couple of 100 miles at the weekend, then you could do that in a pure electric car.
Yeah, sure.
So but yes, I do understand that lots of people don't want to risk it with the public charging infrastructure at the moment. So yeah, I think plug-in hybrid. If you're worried about that, then yeah, why not go for it?
And back to the vexed issue of charging. What is the average time for recharging on motorway chargers? And will the infrastructure keep vehicles moving, or will there be large queues and time hold-ups in future? Presumably, as more people, obviously.
Of course, yeah. Well, this is one of the things, isn't it? Is more people are going to EVs, so there's more demand on the infrastructure. It's quite a frustration at the moment because there's actually more power available in the public charging infrastructure than we're using, and we have more than we need. And yet, I don't think that necessarily it's always in. You are still looking at queues at chargers sometimes. Not that often, I have to say, and often it's quite a short wait time. There is no specific average charging time. It just depends on how much range you need. It depends on what speed of charger you're at, what speed of car charger hardware there is in the car, so the peak rate that the car can accept. So there is no average charging time. But so, for instance, I quite often say, as a yardstick, if you want 100 miles of additional range and you stop at one of the standard 50 kilowatt chargers, which are now being replaced with faster chargers anyway. Even one of those older chargers, you're going to get 100 miles of range in about sort of 45 minutes to an hour in most EVs. But realistically now, I think that's dropping to about sort of 20 minutes to half an hour, since the chargers are now grid service replacing a lot of those old awful electricity.
But again, it just comes down to a matter of investment, isn't it? So who just
absolutely. But we still need more. We need more chargers
stick,
in the motorway services. Absolutely, yeah. So we do definitely need more chargers.
And in rural locations as well.
So, demand is only going to go up, and we need them more. Exactly that, so that you can do your Wales to Cornwall journey without panicking about it. So precisely that.
And Neil wants to know, what will his farmer neighbour replace his Land Rover with to tow his cattle trailer up and down the 1 in 5 lanes and roads in the Yorkshire Dales?
Good question. At
the moment, is there?
Yeah, I'm not sure at the moment. Possibly, maybe a plug-in hybrid Land Rover Defender would make most sense.
Yeah.
But well, like we said earlier with the towing thing, it is difficult. I think manufacturers are actually stepping up to it and offering EVs with quite decent towing capacities now, but probably still too few and far between. And also, like I said, because the range gets limited when you're towing, obviously that has a negative effect on range. So it's a really difficult one. But this is the thing. There are examples like this where actually going to pure EV can be difficult.
It's of course generally, but there are always exceptions. But I mean, the other possibility for that question is my colleague Andrew English has just driven the Ineos Grenadier, the eagerly awaited replacement for the old Land Rover Defender, and they are planning to have, I think they've done a deal with Hyundai to have a fuel cell, hydrogen fuel cell version, so that could be the solution, as we touched on earlier, that it's generally perceived in government levels at least that hydrogen will be suited for those sort of heavy duty applications like HGVs, maybe farm vehicles, and shipping. So we'll have to see. Emma says, what cheap second-hand EV would you recommend? That's a good question.
That's a good question, yeah. I think that the high-end Ioniq, and I'm not talking about the Ioniq 5, which has got a lot of media recently, a lot of coverage. I'm talking about the Ioniq, which is the sort of Prius-shaped Hyundai. I think that's quite a decent used EV because it's really efficient, because it's really aerodynamic, and the real-world range is really pretty good. I think the Zoe is good for a cheaper alternative, because the range on that, if you go for the bigger battery Zoes and this kind of thing, they're all good. The current generation Nissan Leaf there's quite a few good options out there, and also we're starting to see the recent EVs, things like the Peugeot E208 in 2008 and all the sort of Stellantis EVs that have come out in the last couple of years, and from other manufacturers, they're all starting to trickle onto the used market too.
After another year, they'll all be ending lease, so they'll be coming to the used market. Yeah.
Or I think that the bigger battery BMW i3 as well, I think is a good used buy. So yeah, I'd do that for sure.
I need your salary. But again, it's interesting. We touched on the sort of potential fears of battery usage, but I would imagine that there will be certain guarantees. I mean, most of the manufacturers, I believe, guarantee the batteries from new for, is it 7 to 8 years?
8 years and 100,000 100,000 miles is the
I
standard.
imagine, same as you buy a used car now with internal combustion engine, there will be some sort of warranty.
Yeah, some of them,
offered.
Well, yeah, I mean, quite a few of the manufacturers do actually offer a guarantee if the battery drops below 70% of its as-new performance.
Right, okay.
Not all of them do. So if you are concerned about that, then do read the small print. But like I said, battery reliability is generally, battery reliability is better than combustion engine reliability. And you will get range degradation. You can help to avoid that by kind of keeping it between 20 and 80% in your routine stuff. Obviously use the full battery potential when you're on your longer journeys. And that kind of thing. So there's some little things you can do to help prevent battery degradation.
Sorry, it's worth adding in there that the consensus is that you should keep the battery charged between 20 and 80%. Because in general, lithium batteries don't like being completely discharged or fully charged. So if you can keep it between 20 and 80%, that's probably prolongs battery life. But it's one of those things like if you get a car on a lease, you're not going to care because you're going to get rid of it after 3 years. So again, it's another potential issue for used buyers down the line. But that's the same with internal combustion engine cars. Another good question actually: is it worth buying an EV based on an existing internal combustion engine chassis, or buying a purely EV designed car? It's been designed from scratch as an EV.
I think there do tend to be quite a lot of advantages to buying an EV that's been designed from scratch with a bespoke EV platform, but I absolutely wouldn't ever say you shouldn't buy one that's based on a car that's been developed as an ICE car as well, or from a previous ICE chassis. For instance, like the MG ZS EV, which I drove recently, and I was driving the Volkswagen ID3 at the same time. And I mean, the ZS is based on a platform that's been designed to take petrol engines too. And it's absolutely brilliant. It's a really, really good electric car, and especially for the money, it's really decent. And there's lots of things like that. The BMW iX3 is fantastic, and that's again, it's a chassis that's sort of designed to.
I'm looking forward to driving that one in a few weeks.
Really,
actually,
really
but,
good. So no, basically, I would say I wouldn't worry too much about that. The advantages to a bespoke EV chassis like the ID3 is that you tend to get better turning circles, better interior packaging, this kind of thing, and often a less conventional feeling car, so a more modern feeling car sometimes. But I wouldn't discount anything based on it coming from a shared platform for sure.
But again, I think it's also a question of development. Whereas 2 generations ago, a Volkswagen Golf, e-Golf, was essentially a Golf with the engine ripped out and a load of batteries stuffed in its place. Now, obviously, all your modern EVs, even ones that have got internal combustion engine options, have been designed from scratch with the platform at the bottom where the batteries go to keep the weight low for improved sort of cornering performance and low centre of gravity. So, it's a matter of development, I think. So,
but still a recommendable used EV, though, I'd say. The Golf,
yes.
It's good.
Excellent. Anyway, coming on to batteries don't perform in cold temperatures. Just when you need more power for heating and lights, is this slowing EV development?
Well, it's true. Yeah, of course it is. That cold temperatures are unfortunately when batteries are sort of perform worse. So you're going to lose a bit of your real world range.
And very hot temperatures, it must be added. Yes.
Yeah, and very hot temperatures. Yeah. That is a frustration. That just when you most need your aircon or your heated seats and all of that stuff, then that's when you're going to see your worst real world range. But it is getting better, especially, heat pump technology is out there and that improves things quite a lot. I do think that EV technology, as we get there with the, the air conditioning, heating and all that sort of stuff is generally being kind of chipped away at all the time. So you're seeing really small incremental gains every time a new car comes out or gets a facelift, and that seems to be improving. I think it will get better.
Here's one for you. You wrote a feature about this before. What about the myth that EV cars can't be towed or pushed in the event of a breakdown?
Oh, yeah.
Is that a myth?
Well, it's not a myth. Some EVs actually, they do recommend that you can't, because obviously they have, you don't want to damage the regenerative braking technology. So that's part of it. But it's some EVs, there is technology out there that some EVs are designed to have. They have a tow feature on them. Other EVs, obviously, as long as you lift the driven wheels off the road, then that means they can be towed. I think as standard advice, if you have a pure electric car and you do run out of battery or you have a breakdown, I would advise a low loader, or there are some of the roadside services also have various services designed specifically for that. But there is technology out there with with like the pickups, and they can be towed, and actually that will regenerate energy. They'll use the brake regen to actually up the battery charge, which is quite clever.
Again, this is another interesting thing that funny enough, I've just commissioned a feature on that a couple of days ago. Is how the breakdown service is going to cope if there's more and more EVs on the road. Even if you just run out of battery charge in the middle of nowhere, are they going to come up with a huge battery and?
Well, no, there's some quite clever technology for that. Actually, there's quite a few of them now. I've got little collapsible trailers, so they can lift the EV up and get them on little. They're almost like little rollers, so they can tow them without needing necessarily a full flatbed. And there's other, and obviously a lot of them do have generators on board as well, so they can get a bit of charge.
Should have commissioned you to write the feature.
Well, there you go.
I'm sorry, folks, we're about out of time now. Thank you very, very much for all your questions. I'm sorry we didn't get round to answering all of them, but and apologies also for a few technical glitches there. We lost you, you lost us, but I'm really hoping that we can do this again in the not too distant future, so bear with us. Keep reading telegraph.co.uk/cars, and we look forward to seeing you again. I've been Paul Hudson, and this is Vicky Parrott.
Hello. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and goodbye.